Welcome to this fourth video on MATLAB projects. What I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to be talking about the utility scripts that I use on a day-to-day basis with my projects. So here you can see I've got a fairly standard project. I've got the standard folders that I was talking about in my previous video. If you missed that previous video, here's a link in the chat so that you can go back and have a look at that video. There's two main sources of these utilities. First is in shortcuts and second is in utils. They kind of interact, so let me start with them together. Project startup and shutdown I use interchangeably for starting up and shutting down the projects. Here's a good example of a project startup that I use. I have an additional script, which I'm going to talk about in a second, which is check MATLAB release. It's fairly common for me to want to lock a particular project to a particular release. So at project startup, the first thing I do is I check what that release is to make sure I'm right. So let's have a quick look at that. Let's open that up. And this is just a function. I customize it to say what my target release is going to be. And then I have a number of options, whether it's going to be check for a fixed version, check that it's going to be older than, or check if it's newer than or equal to, depending on what it would be. So in this case, as I can't spell, I've got MATLAB. So let's change that to MATLAB. This case, I'm fixing for exactly target release 2024. So let's go check MATLAB release and all good because I'm on 2024A. The next thing I'm doing is I'm actually setting up my work environment for this project. So this is work that is needing to work with a not relationship database, but a graph network database. So I'm setting up a testing container with the trial version, the testing community version of Neo4j, single database to check. So it's opening up a container on WSL on this laptop. It's also loading some environments, some secrets into the environments for me to work with those different databases. Project shutdown, conversely, does the reverse. It goes through the secrets file and pulls those secrets out of RAM so that the MATLAB is clean for the next user, and it also then goes down and shuts down that container so that that container is clear from the system. So that's how I use project startup and shutdown. Check MATLAB release I've already talked about. That's how I use for check to lock into particular versions or particularly older than or newer than type questions. The other two files I use help me with project folder handling. So project root directory is just a shortcut to an alias essentially to get the root folder. It's a way of letting me programmatically rather than hard code. So you can see I've got this on my C drive MATLAB public projects. But if I move this onto another folder, say if I move it onto my Mac, it'll be in users P. Brady projects. So I don't want to programmatically or hard code that anywhere. So project root directory, project root dir is a shortcut placeholder to programmatically get that path for me so I can make my code transportable. In a similar vein, data directory is a utility that I use for handling external data on different projects. So imagine a use case where I'm on my Windows machine here, but I might equally have my Mac to be working on. And I have a fairly large set of data that I don't want in my standard data folder. I don't want in this source code. What I can do is I populate a list of potential data locations, and then the project startup script or the data directory script walks through this and then finds the first match. So to use that example of my Windows and my Mac, I might have something like /temp data on my Windows machine, and on the Mac I might have /users /pbrady /temp/data. That way, when I execute data dir, it will walk through that list and find the first project folder that exists. So in this case, temp data doesn't exist, users temp data doesn't exist, but full file project root data does. So in this case, that becomes MATLAB is going, well, I've programmed this to say that this is going to be my default data directory. If I want to change that, I can come through and make that folder. So let me just make the directories, colon backslash temp data. And now if I run data directory, it's going to find the temp data for me. So as all I do is as I add a new computer or as I add a new user to this project, so if Ali around the corner from me on his Mac is using this, we would just add Ali temp data to this search path as it would go through, and that way we have a transparent programmatic way of shifting data between different computers and different users. This is also works with if it's an S3 or a Azure blob. We can just put it in as a standard S3 URL for my data bucket / folder. Also works quite well. So I find this just as a fairly convenient utility so that I can share data across different machines, whether I can start on my laptop and then scale out to the cloud, or just working between Macs, Linux, and Windows machines. So they're all the standard utilities I use. Stay tuned for the next video where I'm going to be talking about how to use submodules and Git submodules in relationship to projects. Thanks for your time.